With all the controversy surrounding Joker, I felt compelled to see it. So I saw Joker, and I was blown away. The mainstream media kept saying Joker would serve as a call to action for incels. After watching the trailer, I half expected to see a modern version of the 1993 film Falling Down. But it wasn't an incel film, and it wasn't Falling Down. It was Joaquin Phoenix acting his ass off, playing a mentally disturbed man. And in my opinion, he earned that Oscar, no matter what anyone else says. To anyone who's seen Taxi Driver, Joker was clearly an homage when it came to cinematography. But the stories were different enough that I am compelled to say something that some people will probably find controversial. Please don't shoot the messenger, but in my opinion, Joker was the better film. I can understand people being annoyed by that assessment. In the context of our cultural history, Taxi Driver did come first. Joker was clearly an homage to Taxi Driver, and one should consider the time period in which Taxi Driver was made and released. It was a pioneer in artistic style, and since Joker was clearly an homage to Taxi Driver, some credit must be given to Scorsese for Joker's success. And like Phoenix in Joker, De Niro's performance in Taxi Driver was absolutely inspired. But Joker's story was just better. When comparing the characters of Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver and Arthur Fleck in Joker, Fleck is a more fleshed out and sympathetic character. While Travis Bickle observes the filth and rot of the city around him, Arthur Fleck is repeatedly the victim of the rot and his own circumstances. This causes the viewer to have more of an emotional connection with Fleck than they have with Bickle. Joker's spoilers ahead. Arthur Fleck is a mentally ill man who just wants to spread joy and make people laugh. Since he was a young child, Arthur's mother has repeatedly told him that spreading joy is Arthur's purpose in life. Arthur Fleck works as a rent-a-clown, and the first gig we see him working is twirling a sign for a store's going out of business sale. The backdrop for this sidewalk sign twirling clown is a garbage strike and a gritty city that is nearly identical to the city of Travis Bickle's Taxi Driver. It was refreshing to see a film where absolutely no one has a cell phone, and the contrast of living in a time when it was very unlikely to have someone recording what you do, compared to our current culture of nearly ubiquitous surveillance. Unfortunately for Arthur Fleck, this also meant that his boss didn't believe him when Fleck reported having his sign stolen and destroyed by a group of teenagers who also physically attacked him. To add insult to injury, Arthur Fleck is then told by his boss that the cost of the sign would be coming out of his paycheck. Thus begins a cascade of an increasingly ominous series of events that have devastating consequences for Fleck. A coworker gives Fleck a gun, which Fleck initially tries to refuse, because he's not allowed to have guns due to a previous stay in a mental hospital. The coworker insists that Arthur needs to protect himself, and Fleck ultimately takes the weapon. This contrasts with the experience of Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver. Bickle was never the victim and purchased his own weapons, the exact opposite of Arthur Fleck. Fleck initially proves to be very inept with a gun, and ultimately loses his job after he drops the gun during a gig at a children's hospital. The gun does come in handy when Fleck needs to defend himself on the subway. 3 men in suits, who turn out to be employees of Wayne Enterprises, are harassing a woman on the train. It's important to know that Fleck suffers from pseudo-bulbar effect, and his uncontrollable laughter causes the men to turn their attention on him. Fleck is on the floor being beaten when he pulls out the gun in order to defend himself. He shoots 2 of his attackers, but the third manages to get off the train. Fleck follows and shoots the third man in the back. This is where we begin to see a change in Arthur Fleck's personality. He stood up to his bullies and won. Arthur has a newfound confidence, and after years of mistreatment, Arthur is ready to fight back against everyone who has wronged him. Meanwhile, the funding for the program that was paying for Fleck's therapist and medication has been cut. When Fleck asks how he will get his medication in the future, he receives no answer. Clearly, it isn't right to go around killing people. But to Arthur Fleck's credit, he only goes after people who have hurt him. Arthur kills his mother after learning that she has lied to him his entire life. She allowed her boyfriend to brutally abuse him as a child, and severe head trauma from that abuse is likely what caused Arthur's pseudo-bulbar effect. Her actions are likely what led to Arthur's emotional and social problems, probable brain damage, and to his ultimately being a victim throughout his entire life. Arthur's mother is a character for whom it proves to be difficult to have sympathy. Arthur kills the former co-worker who gave him the gun and then lied about being the source of the weapon. This isn't an indiscriminate kill, which is made clear by Arthur's sparing of his other former co-worker who witnessed the murder. Arthur doesn't kill the man in order to cover up the murder he's just committed. This man was kind to Arthur, and Arthur lets him go. Arthur's final kill is made on live television. A late-night comedian Arthur idolized, played by none other than Robert De Niro himself, had made fun of a video of Arthur's stand-up comedy act, then requested Arthur to appear on the show in person. Arthur uses the opportunity to get revenge for his humiliation and shoots De Niro's character in the head in front of a live audience on live TV. In many ways, Arthur Fleck engenders more sympathy from the viewer than Travis Bickle. Throughout Joker, Arthur Fleck is harassed, beaten, mocked, and bullied. Conversely, in Taxi Driver, Travis Bickle is the observer of crime and abuse against others. He is not the victim. Travis Bickle is a vigilante, imposing his own form of justice on the world around him, while Arthur Fleck is just a man trying to protect himself in a world where no one else will. In an era almost exclusively of remakes and reboots, it's difficult to understand why people are so upset about Joker so closely resembling Taxi Driver. Joker seems to be a mashup of Taxi Driver and a film about the Joker. It seems strange that people would choose to be upset about Joker, but are okay with so many other films that have done the same thing or something similar. It's also interesting to see the reaction of the establishment media to Joker, painting the film as nothing more than an incitement for incels. Not once in the film does Arthur Fleck get angry about being involuntarily celibate. He doesn't target whole groups of people with the hate of a racist or misogynist. Arthur is a mentally ill man who has been abused and involuntarily separated from his medication. Toward the beginning of the film, we witnessed an encounter in an elevator between Arthur and a female neighbor named Sophie. There is one scene where Arthur follows Sophie to her daughter's school, but in later scenes, the relationship between the two becomes mutually friendly. We see Sophie going to a comedy club with Arthur and sitting with Arthur at his mother's bedside. But when Arthur goes to visit Sophie in her apartment after he learns the truth about his mother's lies, it becomes apparent that the relationship had taken place entirely inside Arthur's head. It's a heartbreaking moment for the viewer to realize that the one good thing in Arthur's life was nothing more than a fantasy. When Sophie discovers Arthur sitting on her couch, she asks him to leave, and the camera leaves the scene. The next thing we see is Arthur exiting the apartment. The viewer doesn't know what happened in the time after Arthur is asked to leave and when he walks out the door. Did Arthur harm Sophie, or did he peacefully leave? The film doesn't show us. However, director Todd Phillips has confirmed that Arthur did not kill her. A scene was cut from the film that would have shown us definitively that Sophie is alive at the end. Phillips cut the scene because he wanted to tell the story from Arthur's perspective, and a scene showing Sophie watching Arthur on TV did not fit that narrative. At the end of the film, we see Arthur walking down the hall, leaving what appear to be bloody footprints after meeting with a therapist. Except Arthur is still handcuffed, and his clothing is pristinely white. If blood has been spilled, it wasn't by Arthur. This brings up a question that a number of people have been asking. Did anything we just watched actually happen? Or was everything we saw nothing more than a figment of Arthur's imagination? The answer to that question is left up to the viewer. We can also compare Arthur's fantasy relationship with Sophie to Travis Bickle's relationship with Betsy in Taxi Driver. Even when taking into account Arthur's relationship being completely in his head, his following Sophie, and his breaking into her apartment, Arthur still comes out ahead of Travis Bickle. Again, it's incredibly sad that Arthur's fantasy relationship consists of nothing more than happiness, laughter, and companionship, and none of it was real, especially when compared to the relationship of Travis Bickle and Betsy. Like Arthur, Bickle follows and spies on Betsy. But on their second date, Bickle takes Betsy to a pornographic film. Betsy is very upset by this and leaves Bickle at the theater. Instead of accepting the rejection, Travis Bickle continues to be persistent in his attempted courtship of Betsy, eventually showing up at her office, where he becomes violent and verbally abusive. This is behavior we never saw from Arthur, again making Arthur the much more sympathetic character. In his interview with 60 Minutes, Joaquin Phoenix referred to Joker as a sort of Rorschach test. His statement was, "It says something about the person viewing it and what they think that it's about. That's really rare for a film to kind of have that effect on people, so in some ways, I welcomed it." So Arthur Fleck, victim or villain, it all comes down to empathy. Viewers who have empathy will see Fleck as a victim of abuse, a victim of a broken mental health care system, a victim of circumstances. Viewers who don't have empathy will see Fleck as nothing more than a monster. And of course, viewers who didn't actually see the film will call him incel.